Here are 7 white lies that mediocre salespeople tell in interviews. These are the reason it's so easy to hire bad salespeople, even though they look great during an interview. If you're a sales leader, I'm sure you can think of a time in your career where you interviewed somebody, they looked amazing, maybe even they conducted a mock discovery call and it went really well, but then they struggled to ramp, they never really fully ramped, and eventually you had to let them go or just part separate ways. Okay, so these 7 white lies are really, really easy to miss in interviews. And I'm gonna teach you all 7 of them, and make sure you stay to the end of the video, because at the end, I'm going to link to another training video that helps you surface these automatically. Okay, it's almost like a magical interviewing technique that works really, really well. So stay through to the end. I'm going to do my best to make this short and sweet. Now, B2B sales hiring it's a terrifying crapshoot. Okay, so the average is a 40% mishire rate annually, but most chief revenue officers and heads of sales model between 25 to 30%, and that's counting good attrition such as promotions. So that's a really big gap between reality and the model, okay? That can devastate your ARR, your annual recurring revenue model that you're building for the year. And one of the reasons this happens is even mediocre salespeople come across as A players when it comes to selling themselves in an interview. So I'm gonna teach you 7 white lies that mediocre salespeople either write on their resumes or say in an interview, and a little bit about how to catch each one. So first, I achieved 300% or some super high amount of annual quota. Okay, so I'm not saying automatically hold it against somebody if they have this on their resume. You may have a superstar on your hands if they're telling the whole truth, but most likely this is a partial truth. Okay, so here's a commonality of weak sales candidates. They embellish the hell out of their resumes with partial truths. Okay, and usually what I just walked you through is a partial truth. So here's what they have on their resume: achieved 300% of quota. Here's the reality: they may have hit 300% of their assigned quota, but they might have started halfway through the fiscal year, so they only have half of a quota, and it might be at the beginning of their tenure, so that quota might be a ramping quota. So it's a small quota. Okay, so let's say the company's full annualized quota is $1 million. Well, their quota might only have been $100,000. In other words, instead of them closing $3 million against a $1 million quota, they may have closed $300,000 against a $100,000 quota. Now, that's nothing to hold against them, but it's a very different story than 3 million against 1 million. And if they're highlighting this as one of their core highlights on their resume, it's probably because of the rest of their performance is not very impressive, right? They crushed their ramp, but that was about it. So when you see sky high attainment numbers, ask questions like this. What was the duration of the time they held quota? Was it, fully annualized, or was it half of a year? What was the total dollar amount of the quota? Was it ramp or full? What was the total dollar amount they closed against that quota? And then how many deals did they close, right? Did they just get one big bluebird, or did they close a few deals to make the numbers that they made? So here's number 2. I closed Workday or Salesforce, or insert some big logo here. That's what it says on the resume, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes here's the reality: they closed a small startup within the big logo. Okay, I worked with a rep at Gong who was managed out after not closing a single deal except for this one, $10,000 deal of a startup within a bigger company. And he highlights on his LinkedIn profile that he closed this bigger company. And so it's really easy for somebody to not see the reality of what happened. The lesson: dig into the details of the deals that reps highlight. If they're going to highlight accounts and deals they closed, have them walk you through the sales process and the outcome so you have the full picture, rather than just assuming they had some big, complex, impressive sales process they closed with Workday or LinkedIn or Salesforce or what have you. All right, number 3, closed the biggest deal in company history. So here's a story of a rep that I was interviewing. I actually wanted to hire him. He seemed really impressive. He was between jobs, and he said he closed the biggest deal in his company's history. Now, as fortune would have it, I knew a number of people that worked at the company that he worked at during this time. And I asked them about him and this deal. And they told me to steer clear at all costs. Okay, so that's what he had on his resume, and that's what he said in the interview. Now, here was the reality of the situation. He hadn't closed a deal his entire tenure. He was horribly mismanaging this big deal that was going to break a company record. It had a ton of eyeballs on it because it was such a big deal from upper management. And because it had a ton of eyeballs, they realized how horrifically he was managing the deal. And around the same time they were managing him out of the business, it happened to close by a sales leader swooping in, to save the deal. So that was the reality. What was on the resume was a very different story. So chronological interviewing is a great technique and serum to avoid some of these white lies. Go to this link. I have a free, I think it's a 17-minute video training, go.quotasignal.com/chronological. Copy and paste or just type that into your browser now and bookmark it and watch that video after you're done with this one. But let's get to number 4 out of 7, consistently one of the top producers on the team. Okay, so resume is going to say something like that, consistently one of the top producers in the organization. Now, I was interviewing a rep who had that exact wording on his resume, and so I started digging in. How many people were in the organization doing your same job? And it turned out there were 3 people. Okay, he was using the word organization to describe 3 people, including himself. Now, technically, he's not wrong, but again, we get to the same common situation where people embellish their resumes. So he told me that. And now I said, okay, so you said you were consistently one of the top producers. How consistently? And it turned out he was the top producer 2 out of 4 quarters he was in that job. So the reality is he wasn't a top producer consistently, at least in my opinion. He was a mixed bag. Sometimes he was a top producer, often not. Right? He was using the word consistently in a far different way than I would use that term. So lesson, always ask about stack rank, right? Quota attainment without asking about stack rank. How many people are in the organization and where did you end up in each fiscal period that matters? That is what gives you context on somebody's full performance and comparing that to quota attainment, because quota attainment can be a bit arbitrary sometimes. Number 5, top revenue producer. You're probably noticing that I like to dig into what words mean. So in the resume, I was interviewing what looked like a seasoned enterprise seller. I was looking for a new business enterprise rep. And she said she closed more 7-figure deals than anyone in the company. This is a variation of top revenue producer, closed more 7-figure deals. You'd think that's exactly what I'm looking for if I'm looking for an enterprise new business rep. The reality is all of those 7-figure deals were renewals. They were flat renewals. So she wasn't wrong if you define a deal as a renewal. And there's nothing wrong with closing renewals, but it's a very different skill set than what I was interviewing for, which is 7-figure new business deals. Okay, so Socrates said this best: the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. Right? How do you define biggest deal? Is it renewal? Is it total ARR? Is it multi-year contract? Right? You've got to get on the same page with your candidate with what the hell you're talking about. So in your interviews, make sure you're clear on which types of revenue you're looking for and the candidate has done. Is it totally new revenue from new customers? Is it renewal revenue? Or is it upsell revenue? Right? Often candidates are not very clear or good at articulating which of those types of revenue they close in a certain role or in a certain deal. And so you've got to push them to get clear on that for you. Number 6, consistently above quota. Now, this one's actually not an embellishment or a lie, but the context behind it matters. Okay, so here's the principle. A candidate's raw quota attainment doesn't correlate with success or failure. The key is to get the story behind the numbers digging in on the stack rank, like I mentioned, is a great start. So I interviewed a rep from Box in their hypergrowth heyday, and he said he was consistently above 120%, never below 110%, sounded amazing. Now, the reality was the company was so hot that that level of performance was in the bottom half. Okay, they had 50 reps. I did the stack rank exercise. He was 25th. Now, I actually ended up still hiring that rep because I just needed a B player or better to plug into a predictable, repeatable, well-oiled machine. If I needed an A player, though, that would have been a horrific mishire. Okay, so here are 6 questions that reveal the story behind the numbers. What was your quota? Okay, start there, as you probably already are. How was that quota structured, right? If they tell you it was $1 million, was that all new business? Was that all renewal? Was that all upsell? Or was it a mix of 1, 2, or 3 of those? Get clear on that. How did you do against that quota? Walk me through in detail how you achieved that. That speaks to repeatability. Can they do it again? How many people were on your team during that time? You can see I'm going through the stack rank now. And what was your stack rank on the team during that time? One of the best reps I've ever hired only hit 96% of her annual number, but she was number 2 on a team of 50. So the stack rank questions matter. They give you full context. And number 7, the last one before I get to the link to the free training video, I'm pacing for 150% of my number this year. This is my favorite sales hiring story of all time that's ever happened to me. On his resume, and he said this to me over Zoom too, looking me straight in the eye, I'm pacing for 150% of my quota this year. And I said, that's amazing. What's your quota? And he said, it's $1 million. And we were halfway through the year. It was June. And I said, okay, so half of your quota is 750 grand. So you're somewhere between like 1.1 million and $1.2 million closed, right? That seemed like an innocent question. That would be pacing for 150%. But he gave me a blank stare and crickets. It turns out he had closed nothing so far in the year. He was putting up a 0, but he had a strong enough or a big enough pipeline to hit 150% according to the company's historical conversion rates. So he wasn't telling me he was pacing for 150%. He was giving me a forecast for the year. Again, I cannot believe that this has happened. Variations of this have actually happened to me more than once, but make sure you're clear on the number or the words that people are using. His definition of pacing was a forecast rather than I've hit 150% of 6 months out of a year, which I thought is what pacing means. Crazy. So here's exactly what to do next to make sure you can identify all of these white lies and making sure you're hiring salespeople that sell like crazy. Watch my free video training. It's an extension of this video. It's a 6-step interview technique that teaches you how to hire star salespeople. All of these 7 white lies will be very evident when you use this internet or interview technique. Here's where to find it. Go to go.quotasignal.com/chronological. Again, just pause the video or screenshot this, type this into your browser now. Okay, don't forget about it. This is valuable free stuff. Go.quotasignal.com/chronological. Go there now, watch the video. And if you liked this video, hit the like button on YouTube, write a comment. If you have any questions, ask me, and I would be happy to address those.